So you finished your 3 years at Aberdeen, and what did you get up to next?
Oh, I applied for a job in Manchester.
As a
research assistant, again, working on wage theory.
Yes, and did you
with
get it?
Professor Eli Devons. And when I was there, all these ex-servicemen were coming back, masses of boyfriends, all wanting to get to found a family, really. I suppose they were back from the war. Some of them had been in the war for 6 years. And anyway, there was a staff house in Manchester, and there Neville had introduced me when I came to Manchester to Ted Stafford, and Ted Stafford in turn introduced me to Mark. And
tell us the story.
It was a Saturday afternoon. I had a boyfriend then called Goddard.
He was dumped.
And he...
So what happened when you met Dad?
Oh, when I met him? Well, he asked if I'd like to go for a run in the car. And I thought, well, he hasn't got a car. But he'd borrowed a car. And he asked me if I'd go for a run in the car. Well, this young man, Goddard, that I knew, he'd just gone to Australia for a month to see his mother. So I thought, well, I might as well go. I've got nothing on Saturday. So Mark took me on a Friday morning for a run in the country. So he took me into the heart of the petrochemicals world.
What could be finer?
Away to the petrochemicals and back, a huge sprawling estate. And when we got back to my digs, he said, would you care to have a drink? And I thought, well, I said, I don't drink. And Mark said, well, why don't you come now this evening and try one? Which I went there. That was on the Saturday evening. On the Monday evening, he asked me if I'd see him on Sunday. So I said, no, I go to chapel on Sunday.
You don't look too keen.
And then on Monday, he was meeting me outside my room at the university, and we went along to the Southern Cemetery bus route, and when we were waiting for the bus, Mark asked me if I'd marry him, and he'd only known me for 2 days.
So what did you say?
I said, good Lord, no. I said, no, of course I don't know anything about you. Oh, and I can remember his words, I have observed you minutely. Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear that.
I have observed you minutely for some time. Anyway, I dithered and...
I thought you said he was too short.
Oh, that arose,
Well,
yes.
go on, what happened? What did you say?
Oh, he wanted me to get married. I said, but you're too short. And he said, all the great men of history have been short. And I thought, this chap, he'll do.
So how long did it take you to say yes?
Oh, I did it far too long.
For how long?
2 years.
2 years?
I dithered and no.
But eventually you said yes?
Yes, it was.
Where did you say yes?
Where
did you say yes? How did you let him know?
Oh, I can tell you.
Go on then.
I had to go to the dental hospital to have a filling.
Right.
And when the students worked there, it was a dental school, and they injected me
like
to
Margaret
deal
today.
with this tooth. And yes, they gave me the injection, and I couldn't hear myself talking, and I realised that all here was frozen,
Right.
both sides. So they rapidly, student got hold of the professor, and he called his team, and he said, now this is an example of why you never inject a patient on two sides of the mouth at the same time.
Right.
So I made history in that.
Yes, but what's that got to do with that?
And then I thought, oh, where's Mark? I want Mark.
So how
In
long?
my hour of need.
How long after your hour of need did you inform my father that you consent to marriage?
What?
How much after that incident did you tell Dad that you married?
That night I was certain I
And
wanted him.
And was he shocked?
Oh, well, he didn't. I can't remember.
And how long after that were you married?
A year.
A year. Very respectable. Very good. Very good. So did you have a good wedding day?
We had a wonderful wedding day. Yes.
What can you remember about it?
Well, Mark had his shoes mended.
Gosh.
And he was kneeling, I think. And I saw the soles of his shoes stick in my mind.
So that's your abiding memory of your marriage, wedding day, that your husband, the new husband, had mended his shoes. Were there lots of people there?
Yes, about 60.
Where was the wedding?
In Llanganwy Church.
And where was the honeymoon?
In Cornwall.
Cornwall, yes. And where did you go and live after the...
When Mark had bought a house at the university, would lend anybody £300 interest-free to put as a deposit on a house. Manchester University did this. So Mark did this.
What house did he buy?
13 Woodfield Road.
What house did he buy?
13 Woodfield Road.
In Cheadle?
Where you were born.
I was born.
Cheadle Hill.
And what did you think of this house?
Oh, I thought it was wonderful. But the babies came fast and furious. 3 in 2 years and 9 months.
So Janet first.
Yes, and then
Trevor.
And John.
And John. Well, Margaret wasn't far off.
No, 4 in 5 years.
Was she born in Cheadle as well?
Yes.
And how many bedrooms were there?
There were 3. It was a good little house. It had a long, narrow garden, plenty of room for you to play. And
did you have friends there? Did you have good friends?
Staffords were a tremendous help to me. They were an older generation, but he worked at the university with Mark.
So why did you move to Altrincham?
Mark didn't like Cheadle Hill. We wanted a better house, so we moved to have an extra bedroom and a much more expensive house and much more middle class, I suppose.
Did you like it?
No.
Why not?
People were pretentious. The people in my little 13 Woodfield Road had been honest and simple and hard-working.
Yes, and they're all bank managers' wives where you were. Had you stopped working as soon as you got married?
No, I worked for 6 months, and then I was pregnant, heavily pregnant, and left. And I didn't work at all then until I did some extramural teaching when you children were up and away.
Well, you had so many babies.
Well, yes, I had 4 babies in 5 years. And
how was Dad's...
he was very good with the babies.
How was his
and
career?
He loved them.
How was his career going?
His career, wait a moment, he was made a senior lecturer.
So that a lot more money?
Oh yes, quite a bit more money. Wait a moment, he was made, and then he applied for a chair in Stoke.
Ugh!
and he didn't get it, but his professor was John Cohen, and Cohen said to him, well, you haven't had this job, Mark, but the next one that comes up, I'll be backing you.
Right.
And it was a matter of pecking order.
So what was the next one that came up? After Stoke, what came up next?
Well, Swansea came, was a chair. Mark was made a senior lecturer.
Is it true that you told Dad that you expected him to get the Swansea job because you wanted to go back and live in South Wales? Did you tell him to go get it? Were you excited about going back to Swansea?
Oh, I was pleased, yes.
Very pleased or quite?
Well, very pleased. Nancy was there,
yeah.
My mother was there, they were a big help to me with all these babies.
What did Dad think about going to Swansea?
He never settled in Swansea.
No, what did he think about it at the time?
Oh, he was very pleased to get the chair, and we had a lot more money.
A lot more money?
Yeah.
And he also got, he was the first professor there, wasn't he?
The foundation. Yes, there are about 5 there now.
So you moved down to Swansea in 31st of October 1965? Yes, and how much longer was before David was born?
5-year gap.
Yes.
Between Margaret and him.
Yes. So he was born on December the 12th.
That's right.
How long did you live in Cheadle for?
I think about 3 years.
And was that the first house you bought?
Yes.
You remember how much it cost?
I think it cost about £17.50.
£17.50?
Yes, £1,750.
Oh right. And did you have to have a mortgage?
Yes.
Right.
Those days you had to have more or less a double mortgage.
So here's Mum in 1951, aged 27, you could say with the world at her feet. She's taking up a research post at Manchester University after getting a master's at Aberdeen. That said, I think if she'd been a man, she'd probably have got a PhD. And my mother also got a first-class honours degree from the University of Wales, whereas my dad, well, he got a 2-1 and became a lecturer. So I think there were still plenty of obstacles in the way of women in academia in the early 50s. This is Guy Eisner, my mum's best friend at Manchester, and one of 2 Polish women that were made research fellows in the economics department at the same time as my mum. Why Guy is particularly important to my mother's story is that she was on the last Kinder train out of Germany before the war, and then after the war married a fellow refugee from Nazi Germany. And not surprisingly, they were both humanists. They'd given up on their Jewish religion. And the mum was surrounded by humanists, Dad was a humanist, and this started to put pressure on her church attendance, as start of a slippery slope, if you like. She made sure the children were baptised, but slowly but surely she lost her faith. So here is the wedding of Danusha Trotman Dickinson. You can see my mum faintly in the background as a bridesmaid. And this is the second of the Polish ladies. Danusha turned up before the war from an aristocratic Catholic family, penniless, did well academically, and here she is at a wedding day. And the story goes that she and Mum caught the bus to the Brompton Oratory for the grand wedding, but got out a stop before, caught a taxi and turned up in appropriate style. But the point is now that we're into wedding season. Mum's friends were getting married, the boys all wanted to get married, her sister Mary was getting married, and here is Mum with her mother and her father. And it wasn't so long before she got married herself. And in those days, marriage really only meant one thing: large post-war families. So Janet was first, then Trevor, and then myself, John, and then Margaret. So by the time Mum set off for Swansea, she had 4, and David was on his way. She did get a lot of help from nieces, Kath and Lib, here with their Auntie Gwen, but it must have been back-breakingly hard work in the days before central heating and washing machines. The only Welsh that my dad knew was "I'm so tired," which he used to hear Mum say down the phone to her mother. Well, you worked hard, didn't you?
I was so tired. No,
well, it's unbelievable what you had to do.
3 of them in 2 years and 9 months.
My parents found themselves living in caravans for a couple of months during the harsh winter of 1963, as they moved between Cheadleham and Altrincham, and I think my mother's sister Celia saved their bacon there. There wasn't really much scope for holidays, but there were lots of trips down to South Wales to see my mum's parents on Gadlis Farm, and here you can see Trevor outside the farmhouse. And a lot of mum's energy must have gone into supporting Dad and his career. Dad was no communicator, and Mum was, and I think she must have spent hours editing his work, his book, but also supporting his career as he went on to get a chair, and indeed her son's career, Trevor, who also went to get onto a chair. So that's the way she channeled her academic prowess. My father had originally wanted to be a doctor, but joined a photographic company before the war when his parents lost a little bit of money, and even developed some patents early on. You can see from these research papers that he was interested in colour both in the eye but also in TV and film, and he kept this interest in cinematography all his life. Indeed, this last experiment, I was the subject with my friend Lawrence Hibbert. We had contact lenses stuck in our eyes, put in a dark room, and blinding flashes of light went off. I think that was an end of his experimental career on eyes after that. This is an interesting page on research articles. The bottom three are all by Carl Hansel, Dad's father, not just on physics, but on the science of pseudoscience, something that Dad later on became very interested on. If you look further up, there's just one paper with Ted Stafford on photography, but the majority of the articles were with Dad's professor at the time, Professor John Cohen, who he got on very well with, and that was all about subjective probability and decisions in gambling. And indeed, the two of them went on to produce a book on this. So back to Dad before the war, he always loved cars and was a really good mechanical engineer. And this followed through into the war, where he was responsible for keeping the aeroplanes up from flying over Iraq and later on in the Air Ministry. He was also a very good electrical engineer. He built his early radio sets and was a great friend with Turin at Manchester. Churchill had made sure Turin was okay in Manchester, and the lady in the canteen made sure that Turin sat next to my dad, mealtime, where they would talk for hours and hours and hours, but he would never talk to Mum. And it was interesting, there was a recent exhibition of early computers at the Science Museum, and Mum pointed out that one of them was actually attributed to a philosopher, Mays, but it was actually Dad who had built it and never really got the credit. One thing he did do, though, was build an early teaching machine. And I know that worked because I learnt my tables on it, and still a bit of a whiz. Poor old Dad, though, spent a small fortune on patents and never saw it kind of coming through. And if you buy a little machine today, it works on exactly the same principles as Dad back in the early 60s. Another area where Dad was way ahead of his time was in pattern recognition. He'd had some of this on his early computer that we've just seen, but when he retired, he spent his last 20 years working furiously on this. He was a bit of a whiz at computer programming, and his idea was essentially correct, that in order to recognize a number, for example, you don't need to put it on a complex grid. You just need to look at where the gradient changes, and a few simple algorithms can define a number or whatever. So he was way ahead of his time. But unfortunately, like so much of his other work, it never really came to fruition. The other area of interest that my father shared with Turin was that of ESP, extrasensory perception. Turin was a believer and my father was a skeptic. And it's a little ironic, really, that Dad's skepticism of ESP is what he's best known for, because he was a psychologist, he was an engineer, he was a scientist, and he believed in the rational. He didn't believe in the pseudoscience that his father described in the 1940s. And in the article in Wikipedia written by my brother Trevor, this is what he's most known for, his book on ESP, which essentially says that you've got a choice of two, that these new ESP powers, you either have to rewrite the rules of science or there's some trickery afoot. And Dad suspected trickery. Anyway, he was invited off to Duke University. He spent a couple of months there working with the guys and set out to disprove their experiments.
This is depicting the system, the apparatus used and so on during a famous experiment in telepathy carried out by Ryan in Duke University. The actual experiment in his laboratory was carried out by Pratt and Woodruff, now I remember correctly. Ryan claimed it was the strongest evidence he could produce for telepathy.
So were you checking to see whether or not Jenny Stafford could read your mind? Pick the cards?
No, I had suggested it would have been quite easy to rig the whole thing if it was a suitable method, and this was...
And did you rig it?
Yes.
And how did you rig it?
It would take too long to explain. It was a complicated sort of process.
But in a nutshell?
Well, if one was seated in the position that I'm seated in that photograph, one could easily rig the whole thing.
How?
Well, it's hard to... It would be difficult to explain that. Without it would take about half an hour. But it would mean that
was
you
it using mirrors? Was it?
No, you would move. There were 5 symbols in front of you, and it would have been moving one of them or 2 of them. That's about all.
This critical article on Dad's work actually does a really good job at summarising the approach. Hansel favours fraud over ESP. Nevertheless, the book was a huge success and money spinner for my parents, as distinct from all those various different patterns, and had various different rewrites and what have you. And as I say, Dad became famous for it. Anyway, here he is in 1965, just about to take up the chair in Swansea. And this article, I think, describes very succinctly where he'd got to in life. And I think you can see that most of his best work had been done by the time he went to take up the chair in Swansea.
Recognition of handwritten characters in a manner similar to that of normal human vision. The dominant feature of human vision, or human perception, is the invariance displayed in regard of colour, size, shape and orientation. The shape of, for example, of changes in the retinal image due to stereoscopic vision are not apparent in vision and do not change recognition of the shape of objects to any large extent. Even recognition on flat projected pictures of photographed objects is of the same nature, or vision with one eye. The present systems are required for recognition of alphanumerics or printed characters are mainly dependent on being operated at a plane of 90 degrees to a flat surface with the characters of more or less fixed size. These systems show little ability to cope with distortion or effects in the image provided by an optical recording system. Variations in shape of a particular class of objects cannot be coped with. Thus, one system requires that it be trained to recognize each of 6 fonts, after which it can learn a further font, and any further types of character have to be learned afresh. But the human system is not of this nature at all. A child learns to recognize letters at a young age, and very rapidly it can recognize an almost infinite variety of what would be tantamount to fonts, particularly when it comes to recognizing handwriting. It doesn't have to be retrained to each specimen of handwriting that it encounters. I'm going to demonstrate the use of a system, first to recognize letters and digits, 2 to show how, starting with no memory or no knowledge in the computer of the characters to be seen, it can learn to recognize letters and numbers following a single presentation in which the identity is indicated to the computer. Third, the use in recognizing handwriting of words using connected or grown-up type of writing. The programs are in BASIC. They're relatively short and small, and the amount of memory is limited to about 11,000 bytes, and is not exceeded in the program I'm going to show you. It could in fact be considerably reduced from this value if a more economical way of storing was used. In fact, the memory uses 11,000 bytes, such as the memory in the program, and the remainder is used in the actual program. First, I have a program that has been trained, not very extensively, to digits 0 to 9 and capital letters A to Z. The size of the program and the available memory is limited so that it can display learning of reasonably well-formed alphanumerics. The characters are presented using the mouse of the computer. I've arranged it so that a restart can be made on initial position obtained by pressing button V on the computer. For example, if I produce something like that, I don't like it, I press button V and it goes and I can restart until I produce the right character. Sometimes it's easy, for example, if I want to produce a 2, do it like that. And the characters that it's been trained with have been characters rather like the ones used with children at an early stage, which can be seen in the various books they have. Naught would be something like that. I've entered it now. We'll see how we can get some. It will tell us that it's a naught. A 1 would be something like that. I've now reloaded the program and started off scratch with no memory, so that you can see the manner in which it learns to recognise the characters and to discriminate between different types of character. Now for this I can render them fairly small. We'll give it its identity, naught, and then we enter the next one. 1. It'll identify it in terms of the only thing it's got knowledge of from the past, which is a naught. So we now tell it it's a 1, 2, a long time with a large one. That's right. Oh, let's put it as a 2 this time. I did reinforce it as a 2, yes. So now it's learned a new character. In the same way, if we produce a distorted, take the middle there, first word is at. Try to make a nice tidy at. These should be entered as simply and cleanly as possible. At, so tell it that is at. Doesn't know anything. Start, remember. The next word is in, and it's almost bound to say that this is at. It's the only thing it knows. There's the in. Go in. Into that, in. Next one is of. You can only call this in or at, I suppose. It's of. Next one is farm. Farm, quite recognisable. Doesn't know it, so tell it that it's farm. Next one is by. That's the first one. I'll put in dog now. Wait, look. So it is dog. Call this dog. I've seen it before, so we have to tell it. It's dog. We'll do one more. Big. I'm not putting the dottings on the eyes because I can't do it with the mouse without making a continuous line. It's big. Let's try those 7 to start with. The first one was S. Right. We won't necessarily go in the same order. The last one was big. Let's go there. Big. Then we'll go on in the order originally. The next one then will be in. It's big, right? In. And after this it's right. After this is R. Oh, that's right. This one is dog. I think the last one was big, but I don't did that one. Dog. Last one I think is farm, isn't it? I'm trying to draw these as similarly as possible. It won't be this exact the same if we put on top of each other. That's a lot. And now also, these will undergo the same variations. It doesn't matter much about size. What shouldn't do is just try it. So there's that. Can't do these very smooth. So there's that.